Of the Board of Education. This morning, we are going to be discussing assessments, standardized assessments that the children in this district go through every year, namely the 3 through 8 assessments, the Regents testing, and the AP. I'm going to hand it over to Dave Mioli to moderate, but we've been instructed as a board to go ahead and jump in and ask questions at the natural stopping points, and we will also open it up for questions at the end to the community. So go ahead and use the raise hand function among the board and among the community as well, and I will call on whoever has a question. Thank you. Dave, it's all yours.
All right, good morning. All right, it worked. All right, so we are going to be going over 4 sets of data. Here are our committee members. And joining us this morning are Dr. Hines, who is our superintendent, Dr. Victoria Borsella, who is our associate administrator for literacy, Lori Director, who is our director of guidance, Beth Javelin, our Weber Middle School principal, Dr. Kim Liccato, who is our Guggenheim Elementary principal, Dr. Ira Pernick, who is Schreiber High School principal, and Christine Wise, who is our administrative assistant of data management. And she has an asterisk, not because she has a funky home run record, but because she's not actually going to be presenting, but is responsible for a great deal of the slides and data that you're going to see here today. So I just wanted to start out a little bit by introducing this. We're going to review 4 sets of standardized tests, the data from that. As many of you know, we give state tests in grades 3 through 8 in ELA and math and science. We give them benchmark in science in the 4th and 8th grade. Every student from kindergarten through 8th grade takes what we call the NWEA, or the MAP test, which is the measure of academic progress. And they take that either 2 or 3 times a year. And then at the middle school and high school level, there are Regents exams. And at the high school level, there are AP exams. And so those of you who regularly tune into this committee know I like to have a little fun once in a while, which is why I have the question mark after student achievement. Certainly, we look at this data, and it's really important for us to analyze in terms of how we're doing. And there are things that we can do with data that we can't do with other kinds of assessments. And again, we have talked about other kinds of assessments in other curriculum committee meetings. But data are efficient. They yield, numbers that can be, parsed out in various ways, and you'll be seeing a lot of that in the next half hour or so. As Ms. Gilliar said, the students take them every year. They're cyclical, and therefore they're comparable, both, within a student's career and between students or among students and among buildings and districts and states and countries. They are, however, relatively one-dimensional, and we're going to end with talking about Portrait of a Graduate, and as we're going to end with that with many things that we talk about, since that's our North Star now. Again, just as a hearkening back to earlier presentations, other assessments, I think give us more complete achievement information. So real quickly, most of the tests that you're going to see are criterion referenced tests, and there are basically 2 kinds of tests. A criterion reference test, as it says here, compares a student's knowledge and skills on a predetermined standard or other criterion. So the performance of other students does not affect a student's score. So if I teach a unit on states and capitals, and I teach you all 50 of them, theoretically, you should be able to get 100 if you were paying attention. And it's just based on that criteria. A norm reference test compares a student's performance against the performance of their peers. And so the tests are built to yield a bell curve. When I make that test up, I'm going to have some very easy questions, such as what is the capital of New York? Oh, well, maybe that wouldn't be such an easy one. Maybe what is the capital of Pennsylvania? And then I might put a question in there that wasn't even in what we read, but makes the student have to project out and think about and come up with an answer that most students would get wrong. And so you end up with a normed a test. So that's, one of the reasons I put the NWEA in here is for that reason. That's a normed test. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Liccato, who's going to talk about the elementary sections of our state testing.
Thank you. As you're aware, New York State has testing that happens in grades 3 through 8 for ELA, math, and science as well. These tests started in 1999 as benchmark tests. They were only given to students in grades 4 and 8. They were part of a standards-based education initiative. By the time we got to 2006, it was expanded to grades 3 through 8, which is currently where we are now. Again, they were meant to be criterion reference tests, as Dr. Mioli just explained. When the pandemic hit in 2020, spring of 2020, the state decided that they were not going to administer any of these ELA, math, or science assessments for the school year, and they put a pause on that. So if you look at data going backwards, you'll see that 2020, there are no scores for that reason. Last year, they reinstituted the New York State assessments, and they only gave students part 1. So that just entails students answering multiple choice questions. So that was where we left off as of last spring. Today, we're not going to be reviewing benchmarks for 4th and 8th grade science tests. The 4th and 8th grade science tests are currently being changed because there has been a change to the standards. So our participation rates definitely affect our percentages as you look through the school years, because there are students who are allowed to opt out of these assessments.
Yeah, so we just wanted to put that in there, just so you get an idea of what the rates are of students who opt out. And as you can see, it's a little more at the middle school level. And this doesn't really give you a great picture. If we had disaggregated it, if we had been able to disaggregate it by building, you would have seen fairly significant differences among the elementary schools as well. So just keep that in mind as we go through the data. And so, yeah, we're not going to, yeah, Kim talked about science. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Liccato.
No problem. So this slide shows a 3-year longitudinal New York State elementary study for ELA and math proficiency levels. Proficiency levels means that the students scored either a 3 or a 4 on the state tests. So this is the 3rd grade cohort group. So you'll see to the left, when they took the assessment in 3rd grade, 63% of all students scored either a 3 or a 4 on the New York State ELA assessment, and 59% received a 3 or 4 on the math assessment. As they travel to 4th grade, the numbers stay pretty steady. We have 61% of proficiency level for ELA and 59% for math. And as they traveled on to 5th grade, the ELA was at 60% proficiency level and 67% for math. So this is the level that, these are the number of students or percentage of students who scored either a 3 or 4 on the assessment. When you look at this slide, it's the same data as far as the amount of the proficiency level for each of the grade levels for the ELA. However, we broke it down by all students, Hispanic students, and students with disabilities. So if you look at the 3rd grade ELA box, you'll see that Hispanic students, 31% of Hispanic students scored either a 3 or 4 on the assessment. And what's important to know is that's just within the Hispanic student population, 31% scored a 3 or 4 on the ELA. And students with disabilities, you'll see that 45% of our students with disabilities scored a 3 or 4 in 3rd grade. As we travel over to 4th grade, which For the ELA, you'll see that 26% of Hispanic students scored a 3 or 4, and 38% scored for students with disabilities scored a 3 or 4. So as you can see, the Hispanic students scored significantly lower than the students with disabilities in both of those charts. Moving along to the 5th grade, you'll notice again that 32% of Hispanic students scored a 3 or 4, and 29% of students with disabilities scored in the 5th grade a 3 or 4 as well. And as we move to the math assessment, again, 22% of our Hispanic students scored a 3 or 4 on the math assessment, and 47% of our students with disabilities scored a 3 or 4 on the the math 3rd grade test. If you look at the 4th grade test, you'll see 17% of Hispanic students scored a 3 or 4 on the math assessment, and 36% of students with disabilities. And as you move over to the 5th grade chart, you'll see that 30% of Hispanic students scored a 3 or 4, and students with disabilities is at 31%.
So just before I change the slide, I just want to point out, because again, I know we're throwing a lot of data at you here at the same time. These 3 columns are the same kids. So the same kids who are in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And so I want to make sure that I go back to that first slide. The reason we're ending in 2018-19 is that that's really the last year that we had a full assessment. As Dr. Liccato said, that in 2020, there was no test. In 2021, they only gave the multiple choice, and the scores were significantly higher across the state. And so we thought it would be best to focus on these years, and we do so at the middle school and the high school. Also, I just want to, the reason that we're giving you this disaggregated data is the same reason that we did when we presented the graduation data at the last curriculum committee meeting. It's very obvious that those populations are not performing at the same level as our general population. And so we wanted to just echo that same situation from our graduation rates. Okay.
Dave, sorry, Dr. Mealy, since you gave us permission to do this, can I just ask one question?
Sure.
Yeah. How does it match up to data across the state? Are we kind of average? Or is that coming? Am I foreshadowing where you're going with this?
Yeah, that is coming. That is coming.
Okay.
We have a slide for that. We do significantly better than the state, and but you'll see what that looks like. Okay. All right.
All
Wait,
right,
really quickly, Dr. Muley.
Yeah.
Why did the scores, and I think you said it happened statewide as well, increase so much in the 2019 year?
So this year here?
Yeah.
I don't know. And so there's 2 things, it could be the participation rate. It could be the kids who participated. It could be that the other part, if the first slide, one of the reasons I talked about criterion and norm reference tests, and I said that these tests are supposed to be criterion reference tests. So again, if I teach you 100 things and I give you a multiple choice test with 50 items on it, you should be able to get them all right. But what the state has been doing in the last few years they've been waiting until after all the results have been tabulated, and then they've been norming the test. They've been scaling them so that it comes out more like a bell curve. So this is a big discussion, and psychometrically it's complicated, but there is no easy answer for why, for example, it goes from 59 to 67%, any more than there is, an easy answer for why the students with disabilities went from 47% to 31% in 2 years.
And Dr.
Is it-
Mill, it's possible too that they've also had 2 years of practice taking a standardized test, that it becomes more natural for them. That's also, it could be another factor as well.
I would say too, and good morning, everybody. As Dr. Muley was saying, they changed the cut scores. I mean, that's what happens. So when the cut scores change year after year, it's never the same cut score year after year. So that's part of the multiple variables as to why, scores may increase or decrease throughout the state and certainly throughout school districts.
So of course, the fifth grade teachers might argue that, they did a terrific job that year too. I don't know if you can see me, but I'm smiling.
Well, we can give them that.
On this
Okay,
last,
I'm gonna introduce Beth Javelin, who's gonna go through the middle school data.
Good morning, everyone. So on this chart, it's similar to what we showed you for the 3 through 5 testing. The middle school does significantly better on the math scores than we do on the English scores. So that's something to note here. And then the other piece that's really good to see here is that these students have improved each grade level. So in 6th grade, we're at 50% of our students perform proficient. In 7th grade, we went up to 59. And then in 8th grade, we went up to 70%. So what it shows you is that we are improving as the students are getting older. They're learning more and growing, which is exciting to see. And then in math, where they go from a 68% to an 84%. And then what happens in 8th grade when they drop down to a 67% is that we have a significant amount of students that do not take the 8th grade exam. Our Common Core Algebra kids take Regents, so they do not take the state exam, which would explain why there's a drop from 7th grade to 8th grade.
So for those of you who may not be familiar, those would be our more proficient math students, the students who are more advanced. So therefore, they're not in the population taking the test, the regular 8th grade test.
So again, this is similar to what we showed you with the 3 through 5 students. You see growth in all subgroups, which is really also very nice to see. And then again, our Hispanics and our students with disabilities don't perform as well as all of our students. So it's an area where we need to work harder on getting students to perform better. But again, you see growth with all the groups from 6th to 8th grade. That's the same, isn't this, that's the same one. I don't think you progressed. Okay, here's the
All right.
math one. No, that's okay, I'm sorry. And again, same thing, you see the growth in all of the subgroups, they all grew. And again, the drop from 7th grade to 8th grade in math was because we have about every year 105 students that take the Regents exams, and those students do not take the 8th grade exam. And again, we don't perform as well in our Hispanics and our students with disabilities, but our percentages are higher than they are in English. For those students, we perform better, again, in math than we do in English across the board. So Rachel, this goes to your question a little bit, what you asked before. We decided to compare to Nassau County opposed to the state. We way outperform the state if you're looking at state data, but we decided to do Nassau County because that's closer to us. And if you see, this is for students in grades 3 through 8. So it's our whole Port Washington school district. And we perform better than Nassau County, or about the same. So in ELA, we're a little higher. We have 40% and 34% compared to 34, 23 compared to 24%. And then as a whole, 3 and 4s and proficient students, we're at a 63% compared to 59%. And that is the ELA. And then again, in math, we outperform. It's a much larger gap with us compared to Nassau County, where we're at 34, Nassau County is at 29. On a level 3, level 4, we're at 36 compared to Nassau County at a 34. And then as a proficiency as a whole, we're at a 71% compared to Nassau County, which is 63. So the good news is we're outperforming Nassau County, but it doesn't mean we don't have room to grow.
So I put this slide in here. This is, kind of the information that ends up getting printed in Newsday. It's kind of a summary of 1 year, that last year that we have been highlighting, 2018-19, which is the last year again that we had the full test administered. And it's grades 3 through 8. It has level 1, 2, 3, and 4 for every student. For every grade level, and the percentages. And then what I like about this is that the third to last column on the right, you can see that the dark green means that we are 10% or more above the region. And the region is not Nassau County. It's what BOCES considers to be comparable districts to us. I'll just leave it at that for now. The lighter green is 1 to 9% above the region, and the yellow is 1 to 9% below the region. We don't have any of the dark red, which would be 10% or more below the region. So if you look at that, it looks like we're doing pretty well. You know, the 61% is right dead even in 6th grade ELA. The 65% on the very top, 3rd grade ELA is only 1 percentage point lower than the region, and all the rest are some color green. So even though, you know, those numbers are not what we might consider to be great numbers in the 60s and 70s and 180, you know, relatively speaking to our region, we do well. So now I knew this question would come up, so we put the slide in. So how do we do next to, you know, these are the 4 that I think we like to compare ourselves to.
I was biting my tongue and I wasn't going to ask.
I knew you would. So we put it right in here. I should have kept it till the end, but no, keep you hoping. So here's Port Washington, and I'll just give you a minute to digest that. But as you can see, with the exception of 6th to 8th grade math, and you heard Ms. Javelin, you know, give you a rundown on that, we are below those other 3 districts for the most part in those tests.
Dr. Mioli, with no blame to this question, I'm wondering if you know off the top of your head, because I don't, what our opt-out rate is versus those surrounding districts, because obviously that could skew results. Are we about comparable with the other districts around us? I think we may be, but I don't want to assume.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. We don't have access to their data, but on this, there are public school report cards for every district in New York State, and they generally publish 2 years of data. So if you really wanted to, or if you really wanted me to, I could go on and look at each of their websites and figure it out. But that might not, but again, they don't disaggregate the data. So you don't know if it's the whole district participation rate or one school or what it is. So it's kind of hard to draw a conclusion for that.
Got it.
And there are lots of reasons, but looking ahead, I think one of the questions that looking at this data has brought to us is, you know, is it really important, or how important is it that we do really well on these tests? And I'm just going to leave it there for now, because I think we want to show you a lot more data, and I think that question will become a little clearer as you see some of the other data. So this again is the next set of data points that we're going to look at, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Victoria Borsella to take it.
Good morning. So our students' grades K through 8 take the NWEA, which is our universal screener in Port Washington, and it's required for RTI. This is a norm referenced assessment. It's international assessment, meaning it's given in 145 countries and 9,500 school districts. It is also given in Spanish for students whose home language is Spanish. And it's also important to note that all students take this assessment in our district. There is really no option to opt out. The NWEA is administered for many reasons, including initial screening of students' performance, helping teachers identify individual learning needs, measures growth over time, and helps plan instruction. At the elementary level, this assessment is given 3 times a year, in fall, winter, and spring. students are assessed in 3 areas: math, reading, and language. In the middle school, it's administered 2 times a year, fall and spring, and it's administered in winter only for students who have required progress monitoring. Also, in the data that I'm going to show you in the next slides, there's no data for students with disabilities because the NWEA does not collect or report data for students with disabilities. It doesn't disaggregate the data.
So just to be clear, when we say all students, we mean all K to 8 students take this test. So this, again, for those of you at home and those of you board members who have students either currently in or had them in the district, this is kind of what you get at home as a report for each of the individual students. There's a score that's reported called the RIT score, and it shows growth. It shows the fall, winter, and spring. I think you may have a little trouble seeing that. And then the fall again of the following year, and it shows the projected growth. That's what all those bars are. And in the right, it translates that score into percentile range. So if you are one of those parents who spends a lot of time looking at this and this data, I just want to be clear that all the rest of the slides are in the percentile statistics.
So on this slide, I analyzed reading data from the NWEA. I looked at a 3rd grade cohort of students beginning in 2016-2017 school year to present. And as the data presents, the reading percentiles are consistently even in about the mid-80s. And when we talk about percentiles in this slide, the data represents the district's average over time. So if you score in the 84th percentile, it refers to our students performed as well or better than 84% of the students taking this assessment nationwide.
Actually, internationally, Dr. Borsella.
Internationally wide.
Right.
So again, on this slide, I analyzed data from the math NWEA. I looked at the same 3rd grade cohort beginning in 2016-2017. And as the data presents, it's pretty consistent. The math percentiles are in the upper 70s. And one of the biggest takeaways, I think, between the NWEA and the state assessments is that the NWEA has less variation and shows pretty much consistent data on all our students.
So, before earlier I said that this is why I put this set of data in here. I make the statement that you could park a car on that data. Those again are pretty much our same kids from year to year, and even including 2 remote years, both the ELA and the math are very consistent. I remind you that this is a normed test, and it's an international test given to thousands and thousands of students.
So on this slide, I compared how well all students perform to the Hispanic subgroup in reading. And for the 2018-2019 school year, the data shows that Hispanic students perform significantly lower than all of our students.
Do we know how that compares to other places?
So
That disproportionality?
For the NWEA, unfortunately, I don't have other districts' data. I only receive our data. But if you think about it, it is an international assessment. So the Hispanic students are scoring in the 14th percentile internationally, our Hispanic students.
I see.
Yeah, no, we don't get, since it's not state data, we don't get other districts' data at all on this.
Ms. Borsella, you had said that children whose home language is Spanish can take the test in Spanish. Am I right to assume that you mean their home country? Like if the language of the country is Spanish, or are our Spanish speaking students able to take the test in Spanish?
Our Spanish-speaking students are able to take it in Spanish.
Okay. So I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but to me, then that 14% becomes more worrisome if you can't say, oh, wait a second, we're maybe talking about a language barrier here. But I'm going to leave it to you to unpack that a little bit too, and tell us a little about what you think is going on there.
Well, I'm just going to jump in quickly because a lot of times our students that come from other languages can't read in their own language either. So even though we're giving them a test in their language, they're not able to read their own language. They're able to speak it, but not necessarily read it. So it's not always a benefit to give them the test in their language. Could be part of the reason.
Thank you. That's an interesting piece of information.
So here I compared the same students in the 2018-2019 school year. And I looked at how well all students performed to the Hispanic subgroup in math. And again, the scores are significantly lower in the Hispanic subgroup.
So again, I just want to point out that same dynamic that you saw in the state tests. First of all, again, these are pretty much the same kids. It's the same cohort. Oh, no, I'm sorry. These are not. Nope, this is the comparative data. Never mind. Okay, back to Ms. Javelin. So we're on our, this might be a, one of those natural breaks. We finished the 3 through 8 state tests. We finished the NWEAs, which again are K through 8, and we're about to start the secondary. So I don't know if there are any questions or we should proceed.
I have a question.
Okay.
Are there any, I guess, takeaways from that first set of data? Like, do you guys, is there any conclusions that we should be drawing, or are we doing great? Do we have things that we should be thinking about how to change? Like, what's your, and that's not a loaded question, it's a genuine question. Like, what's the takeaway from what we just saw, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I'll start. We put a number of them at the end, and again, that's fine. So I think one of the takeaways,
you can kick it to the end if you want. I didn't mean to.
No.
Okay.
Well, you know what? I think maybe we will, because I think you'll see similar data at the secondary level, and I think it'll be a richer picture to talk about it. Okay, but we'll put that in the parking lot for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Javelin.
Can I insert one other question, and you can kick this to the end
Sure.
too if you want. When I had asked about the comparisons to the state level, I was thinking also of the comparisons for Spanish-speaking students. I guess we're calling them Hispanic. I'm assuming Spanish-speaking is synonymous with that, but Hispanic and students with disabilities. And I think we're just looking at the data for that here, not a comparison to Nassau or to the state. And is it fair to assume that disproportionality that we see in the NWEA results is also sort of, is it statewide? Is it Nassau County wide? How are we comparing on the state tests as well? Is the disproportionality kind of the same? The same between us and the rest of Nassau County. Obviously we have the comparison in front of us on how we're doing overall compared to surrounding districts and how we're doing compared to Nassau County on the New York State ELA and New York State math. But I'm just wondering if we're doing about the same in terms of the Hispanic students and the students with disabilities too.
So I'll start with that. And again, if anybody else wants to jump in. So again, going backwards, we don't have that data from the NWEA for other districts. The data in the state tests, we have lots of data. We actually just picked those two to disaggregate but there are many other elements that we could have disaggregated, but we wanted to make sure that this was focused and similar to what the graduation presentation was about. We didn't do that comparison, whether, our Hispanic population is doing the same in third grade as, Rosalind's third grade. We could, for the state tests. We don't have that data for the NWEA, but we did not do it here for this presentation. Does that answer your question for now?
Yeah, let's keep going. Thank you.
Okay.
I know this is like very data driven and you've given us a lot of information.
Yeah.
So of course we have additional questions too, but
Yeah.
thank you for this.
Okay, Ms. Javelin.
Okay, so we offer 2 Regents level courses at Weber. We offer the Common Core Algebra Regents and the Earth Science Regents. Both courses, students take a test to get into the class. So it is usually our students that are performing at the top of the grade level that it's accepted into the program. So in 2019, we had 105 students that took the Common Core Algebra Regents. All of the students scored a level 5, which is between an 85 and 100%. And in that cohort of 105 students, 4 of those students were Hispanic students and 2 were students with disabilities. So again, all the students scored the highest level that they could score on that Regents. And then the Earth Science Regents, we had 160 students that took the Earth Science Regents. The Earth Science Regents, the highest level that you could score is a level 4. So 175 students scored a level 4. 1 student scored a level 3 that was not Hispanic or a student with disability. And then within the Earth Science region, 6 students are Hispanic and 4 students are students with disabilities. So based on both of our regions, we score extremely well, or I should say, the students score extremely well. So we're very successful in this in the courses.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, can we go back one? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to introduce you. This is
That's
Laurie.
okay. So at Schreiber, we took a look at the data from the 2019 Common Core Geometry and Common Core English Language Arts Regents exams. I'll get into that one in a moment. But we selected these because these exams are administered to almost every student at Schreiber. So this table that you see here depicts the total number of students who took the Common Core Geometry exam and their performance. So you can see that a total of 401 students took that exam. Of those 401 students, 75 of them are Hispanic and 45 are students with disabilities. So we can go to the next.
Yeah, if I may just, I just want to make a comparison back to the Weber slide. So the good news here is that, 99 to 100% of the students, passed, including our Hispanic and students with disabilities. The bad news is we only had 4 Hispanic students take it and 2 students with disabilities on the top one and 6 and 4 on the bottom one. So the data here, the Common Core Geometry Regents, is much more of the total population, just as the 3 through 8 and the K through 8 tests were, if that makes sense. Okay.
Can I just ask a question about that? Because I'm wondering about the jump between algebra and geometry in the number of Hispanic students and students with disabilities taking the test. Right? There's a huge number difference. What's happening there to cause that number jump?
It actually isn't. I think the reason they use this data, because the kids that don't take algebra regents in 8th grade, they take it in 9th grade. The reason they're doing geometry as a whole class, so you could get a better representation of numbers. So every student in our district, providing if you're not, there's some students that don't take the regents, but every student does take the algebra regents, but some just take it in 8th grade and some take it in 9th grade.
Right, so this exam represents students that took geometry either in 9th grade or in 10th grade. So that would encompass the larger number.
Okay, but doesn't the first slide about the algebra regions also encompass the 8th and 9th grade takers, or this is just one group of them?
That's Weber.
That's just students that are taking it as eighth
Okay,
graders.
sorry, I'm with you. So this is just the accelerated students who are taking it a
Correct.
year early.
Right, right.
Okay, so what this highlights for us is that we have very few students with disabilities and very few Hispanic students who are accelerated.
Yeah, that's what I meant by good news, bad news. And that's why I wanted to draw
Got it.
the comparison between this slide and the next.
Sorry, I wasn't thinking that Weber.
No, not at all.
No,
It's
that's,
Right.
a
Thank
lot
you.
of data and a lot of stuff. And we're changing the metrics on every slide. It's a lot to
Right.
keep up with.
okay, so here's a different way of looking at the data that I just shared with you. This pie graph depicts the performance of all of those 401 students we just looked at that took the 2019 Geometry Common Core Regents exam. So if we look at the totals in levels 3, 4, and 5, we see that about 88.5% of our students passed this exam. And next, we'll take a look at the performance level for our Hispanic students with the same exam. So we can see that almost 70% of those students passed the 2019 Geometry Common Core Regents exam. And for our students with disabilities, this last pie chart shows their performance. So again, we see that the majority of our students in this subgroup performed at a level 3, 4, or 5. However, this is 65% of our students with disabilities who passed the geometry regents in June 2019. So here's a snapshot now of the English Common Core Regents from June 2019. Again, we've had 427 students who took that exam. Of those students, 102 were Hispanic and 43 students were students with disabilities. And this also shows their performance levels. And we're going to take a look at that again in the pie chart on the next slide. So for all students, 95% of all of our students that took the ELA Common Core Regents in June of 2019 passed with a 3, 4, or 5. You could see that large piece of the pie that went to our students that performed at a level 5. So for our subgroups, we look at the performance of our Hispanic students first. 83% of our students passed the ELA Regents who are identified as Hispanic students. And last, our students with disabilities are depicted in this pie chart. Here, 88% of our students with disabilities passed the 2019 Common Core Regents in June of 2019. So as an overall, while we're pleased with the Regents data, but there's always room for improvement, as you could see with our, certainly with our subgroups. We would love to continue to find ways to support those students to move them up to levels 4 and 5 and move those 1s and 2s into the passing category.
So that's the third set of data completed on our regents at both the middle school and the high school. And then Dr. Pernick is going to take us to the close with AP.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to see all of you again. We're going to focus on the advanced placement data from 2018-2019. Again, like you've heard, we wanted to focus on a more traditional year. The 2020 data is incomplete. AP exams were given online that year, and 2021 we didn't have access to data from the county just yet. I wanted to give you a little snapshot of our AP program. So in 2018-2019, we gave just under 1,700 total AP exams, and that represented 641 unique students. So we didn't double or triple or quadruple count students who took multiple exams. Just to give you a sense of how large our program is, we're, depending on the year, about the 7th to 9th largest high school in Nassau County. There are 55 high schools in Nassau County. We typically have the 3rd largest AP program in the county based on the number of exams that we give. Last year, we broke 1,700 in terms of our total number of exams, and I expect that to happen again this year as well. Wanted to also, since we're focusing on the subgroups of students with disabilities and Hispanic students, you get a sense of those percentages, how many students are taking exams in each of those categories. I also wanted to compare it to Nassau County. You can first see just the difference in the population size. I think we want a larger number in terms of the percentage of unique students taking exams compared to the county. We're at 38%. The county is at 12%. I think that speaks a lot to the nature of our program. And even in our subgroups, we're I think in the ballpark with the rest of the county in terms of the percentages, students with disabilities and Hispanic students, even though there is, of course, room for growth. And I just want to alert everybody that all of the subgroup data is collected from College Board and is self-reported. So we don't pull this data from our own, from Aspen. This is purely self-reported data. Wanted to then, well, first we can go and I can show you just how well we do on exams at the next slide, Dave. Just to give you a sense, overall, our students perform well, scores 3 through 5, which is generally how we would evaluate success, on an AP exam. And we perform well. And I think there's a lot to be proud of. And this is one way to measure success with an AP program. What percentage of your kids score 3 through 5? I want to show you some other ways to also measure the success of our AP program. And Dave, if you go to the next slide. So I wanted to show you a few other ways in which we can measure data. And some of that's going to be connected to how well our students do in comparison to the rest of the region. The region is Nassau County. So I pulled out a few exams to focus on. The first column next to the exams, you can see schools surveyed. That's the number of other schools in the county that gives these exams, okay? Usually it will correspond to the courses run as well, but it doesn't have to be that. So US history, you can see almost all the schools in Nassau County provide US history, have AP US history. I want you to look at the participation rates. So over half of our junior class, by the way, this is every year, just over half of our junior class takes AP US history. You can see the comparison participation rate for AP US history. We far exceed the participation rate of other schools in Nassau County. The good news is the quality index. Quality index is the percentage of students scoring 3, 4, or 5 on the AP exam. And so for AP US history, even with a much higher participation rate, we still far exceed in terms of students scoring 3, 4, or 5 to the rest of the county. And I think that, again, speaks a lot, right? You would think that it would be reversed, that a lower participation rate, which is usually tied to how schools filter out students from taking AP courses, that would drive up their quality index. And for us, that doesn't hold, which I think is great. We'll see that again in AP Physics 1. Not quite as many schools offer the course. Our participation rate is far exceeds the region again. I think that speaks a lot to the success of our physics program. Physics is not a required course for graduation, yet almost all of our seniors, or many of our seniors, take physics in some way, shape, or form, either the AP version or Regents or non-Regents. And again, you can see the quality index. While the gap isn't as large as AP US history, it is substantial, especially when compared to the participation rate. We see some differences. AP microeconomics, we offer a macro economics in 1 year. Less than half the schools in Nassau County offer it. We have a larger participation rate, and our quality index is also higher than the rest of the region. And I added a few others that have very few other schools offering these. These aren't the only AP courses. There are a few others where we are one of very few. that offer the courses. And so I included two here for you. These are single section courses. AP Spanish Literature is one section of students every year. AP Latin, also a single section. So that's why the participation rates are so low. But you can see that they are similarly low around the county. And then our quality index in AP Latin, our quality index was lower. And if I showed you if I had a slide that had the 5 years worth of data in AP Latin, you would see a wider range because there's so few students who are taking the exam. It really depends year to year how well our students do. But I wanted to point out that our program is large. It serves many students. We absolutely, I think, should be asking ourselves, what do we want to focus on in terms of how we measure success? Right, so we can measure success based on quality index, and we could aim at that number, or we can measure success looking at our participation rate, and we could aim at that number. And if we aim at the participation rate and try to get those numbers up even higher, then we certainly would be able to get more students, which might get us access to the subgroups that we've talked about, Hispanic students and students with disabilities, and allow them to challenge themselves with the most rigorous courses that our school offers. So I think, figuring out how we want to focus on success is maybe the big question that we would ask in terms of our AP program.
Thank you, Dr. Pernick. So that completes our 4 sets of data. Just before we went to some takeaways and more questions and discussion, I just wanted to make a couple of points. Where we tried to give you a brief but accurate picture of kind of where we are. Again, even though the last year was 2019, it's really the last year that we had really good data from a lot of kids, except for the NWEA. And, when we talk about where we want to go, we are now looking through this lens for everything. And so going back to that question mark in my first slide about student achievement, this data is very important. I don't mean to minimize it. The numerical data is important to everybody. And we want to do as well as we can on it. Dr. Pernick, I think, outlined one of the takeaways that you're going to see in the last slide, which is how do we measure that success? How do we measure that achievement? And so if I draw your attention to some of those circles, although rigorous curriculum, the second one up, the yellow, is certainly going to remain one of our cornerstones here in Port Washington. You see that there are lots of other things that we want our students to be able to embrace, and elements that we want them, traits that we want them to have when they graduate from Schreiber. So social and emotional intelligence, life balance, those types of things, we don't measure with standardized tests. I know it's self-evident, but I just want to bring it up in terms of that. And just lastly, if you read the whole Portrait of a Graduate, there's a lot that we talk about in terms of authentic assessment and problem solving, and those kinds of assessments, again, hearkening back to an earlier presentation, a board curriculum presentation, will give us a richer picture of a student's success. So here are kind of our big takeaways, and I'll just read through them and then we'll have at it. I think it's very obvious that we want to find ways to continue to improve the achievement of Hispanic students and students with disabilities. And again, we highlighted this so that everybody's heads wouldn't explode. We can disaggregate data for a lot of different subgroups, but we just wanted to focus on these two for now, just to be consistent with the last one. The 3 through 8 state test data are not as consistent and reliable as the NWEA. And so that brings up the question, Mr. Smith, you asked earlier, and Ira kind of just echoed it at the high school level. You know, should we be more focused on 3 through 5 state test results? I think I'll leave that open for now. The 6 through 8 results are consistently good, compare favorably, and show growth. And that's true in the NWEA. It's true in the regents. It's true in the state tests. And then the Schreiber results in terms of quantity and quality are very good. You know, you're looking at slightly different sets of data because you have the regents and the APs, and you know, they're only, the regents measure almost everybody, but the APs again are voluntary, and students choose to take those. But both, as Dr. Pernick pointed out, we do attract a lot of students. We do have a lot of offerings, and the quantity and quality are both excellent. As Ms. Director said as well, there's still room for growth. And then I think the final takeaway question is challenging more students more important than getting higher results? And that's putting it a little bit in a either or. It doesn't have to be. But again, I think that's a slightly different way of saying what Dr. Pernick just ended with. So I'm going to take this down if I can figure out how. There we go. And I'll turn the baton back to you, Ms. Gilliar.
So with that, I guess we've thrown out some questions already, but I'll open it up to the board first. If anybody has any questions, or any administrator has anything that you'd like to add. Ms. Bays, go ahead.
Thank you. I lowered hand, not unmuted. First of all, I want to thank every single administrator that took part of this in this presentation. This is very thorough. I know it took a lot of work on your part, and comparing data, as you've been hearing the Board of Education speak the entire year. We want to look more at data. We want to look more at comparisons, and most importantly, we want consistency, and we want to be able to figure ways in which we can improve. So I really appreciate this type of presentation, and I look forward to seeing more in line like this as we go forward. So my question is, I have a lot, because the first thing I wanted to say is, Dr. Pernick, you talked about, participation versus quality index and which is it. And I just want to add, based on my opinion and based on what we have done as a vision and mission and a portrait of a graduate, in my opinion, it should be participation. So, that I think we should be able to give access to everyone and allow everyone, the more to have these opportunities, I think the better. So, but we should also recognize that if that's what we're doing, so that we're not then judging ourselves based on the quality, that we should be able to give the participation. My question for you guys as well is, what do we as a board need to do to help get these numbers improved? So I understand the question about the difference between NWEAs and state tests, but we are constantly compared to the state tests. We are constantly, that is what is reported, and that is what we seem to find ourselves defending. So how do we raise the percentage in the proficiency levels? And more importantly, how do we help our Hispanic students, and how do we help our students with disabilities? I am very familiar with the Hispanic student difficulties. I know that that many times there's a language barrier that we have to address, and they've just gotten here. I also know there are many times that they're not here for a very long time. So I understand a lot of the issues, but what do we as a school board, what can we do to help the administration make the improvements, I guess, is my real question. And I know, you may not be able to answer it right away, but I think that that's what we as a board can help with, or try to, unless the board in general doesn't think we need to do anything to improve, right? So I'm assuming that the board wants to improve, but
There's always room for improvement. I
Yeah,
think
I'm
probably
just
every
saying,
administrator thinks that too.
yeah, I know, but I made a step, me, the process person, I like took an extra step and say, what do we do? But, first we'd have to get consensus that we need to improve, right? So
You
but
realized maybe you were ahead of yourself.
I did get it, but I
But
kind of know the
I
board.
think we already have
kinda know-
consensus in the district goals, right?
Yes, yes. So
Agree.
anyway, I see Dr. Hines has his hand up. I'm gonna stop asking my question.
I
Thank you.
I think he has his hand up because he's going to address what you said.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep. So I'll try to be as succinct as possible because there are a lot of different edges to that question. First of all, it starts at the base of the pyramid, which is at our primaries, at the primary level for sure. And I think Victoria would totally agree with that. Certainly at our pre-K, kindergarten, first grade level, where literacy is not only introduced but reinforced, and we want our students to be as proficient as possible. So the extra supports, to answer your question, how can the board help, is when we make recommendations for those extra supports. That is where the magic happens for sure. And you can see an upward trend, certainly as our students enter Weber and then when they move to Schreiber. So literacy is one of the cornerstones for success for everybody, right? Reading, writing, listening, speaking, all those different things. But it does start at that level for sure. We do go above and beyond for our students who I will say are somewhat caught in purgatory, who are not quite there at the cutoff for AIS support, but still need some extra supports. We know the ARP funds have helped this year. They'll help next year for sure. But if this is a goal, actually, I know it's a goal, we need to figure out ways to strengthen those supports as well. I think Priscilla has done an incredible job in her first year for addressing needs as far as our L's are concerned. And that will continue to grow over time. And so again, when the budget cycle comes up for not this budget cycle, but the next year, when she now has her her sea legs under her after a year, she's going to make recommendations that will most likely cost money. And so when that happens, and if the board is helpful in securing those funds, that would be, I think, beneficial as well. But money is not going to solve all of these problems. And so please don't think I'm just saying, let's throw money at this and then all of a sudden our scores are going to increase. I don't think that. I think it's part of it though. We need to have a laser-like focus as far as making this an incredible priority. And of course, that's where the strategic plan comes into play. So when we start rolling out this strategic plan and what that looks like, what that entails at all three levels, that'll be incredibly helpful when the board is supportive of that as well, because this is not a one and done. This is not like an inoculation. Let's do something for 1 year, everything's fixed. It's not the case. So this is part of the DNA. This is a 14-year journey for our students, right? Starting in pre-K. And so we have to make sure over time that, because I'm sure Beth has lots of ideas as far as how we can support her students at Weber, and I know Ira does as well. The best thing we can do, and I know Emily, you spoke about this before, is about creating, Ira too, is opportunities for kids. Taking down some of those gates that allow students to take courses they may not have taken before. Dr. Mioli's spoken about this, when the reach is exceeding someone's grasp and really pushing kids. That's what we need to do. And I think when we do this over time, you're going to see incredible success.
Just for full disclosure, I stole that from Browning.
Duly noted.
I think Miss Javelin has her hands up.
Now, Mr. Smith.
Oh, she must have taken it down. All right, Mr. Smith, go ahead.
Hey, I actually have kind of a follow-up question to what Dr. Hines was just talking about. So Dr. Hines, I like everything that you were just saying, but one thing that you and I have discussed privately, actually the first time we met after I joined the board, is that a big concern that I have, and I know Rachel and Nan share, is specifically about literacy and reading, especially at the early primary level. And I had heard a statistic that a few places that when every year that a child is below grade level reading prior to third grade, it's almost irreversible. It's kind of like a compounding effect, and it becomes harder and harder for them to ever catch up in anything academically. So you had made a comment that kind of as the new administrators get their sea legs and we start thinking about the 2022, 23, 24 budgets, we're going to start looking at all of this stuff, or not looking at, we're going to start thinking about, you know, things we can fund. But I am concerned particularly about the, you know, the reading performance, you know, of all the kids, not just the Hispanic kids, but I guess the Hispanic kids in particular. If we're not addressing it for these kids on their 14-year journey now, the kids who are in kindergarten this year and the kids who are in kindergarten next year, it's gonna impact them and their grade really for the next, you know, 12, 13 years after that. So I know we have a whole meeting devoted to this, but are we thinking about interventions that we can be doing today and just like always trying to improve in that department?
So I know our building principals can speak about this as far as the interventions we have. You know, one of the interventions that has moved away, unfortunately, is reading recovery. I know Dr. Meal is a big proponent of that for students in first grade. There is a decent expense attached to it, but the program itself has been proven over time to be incredibly successful. We do have reading teachers at every building for sure. And again, the AIS teachers are really helpful. I think what this board has asked us to look at and review, and I think especially in the area of literacy, is the consistency factor and the fidelity factor within all of our grade levels. And that is what we will target moving forward. You know, in many districts, Mr. Smith, you know, there's like a basal program. So everything's scripted. Everything is, you know, mapped out as far as what lessons would take
My
place.
mom was a reading teacher, so I know all about basal.
You know all about it. All right. And then you have the complete opposite, right? If the needle's over here, then you have another needle that's way over here where it's a hodgepodge of things. And I think one of the things that we have to I know one of the things we have to do is take a deep dive into our literacy program, especially at the K-5 level and what that entails. And I see Victoria shaking her head too. So we have a lot of work to do, but in the meantime, I do want to applaud, if I can take this time. It all starts with actually having a conversation with the data we have in front of us, right? So think about this. Systemically, we have taken on something that I don't think this district has ever done before, is looking at all of our test scores, soup to nuts for the most part. Not all of them, but the ones that are, I will say, that are visible, mostly outward facing. And we're saying to ourselves, okay, we're doing really well in some areas. We're doing incredibly well in some areas. And there's some areas we need to really focus on. And that's what we're going to do moving forward.
So Rachel, what I was going to say before was that we have to figure out how to equal the playing field for these students. Meaning what can we do for them in school to get them to be successful and giving them opportunities to help them with whatever classwork they're having, right? So if there's support classes that we need to put into place or things like that, of course that involves staffing, but if kids had more support internally and didn't rely on the outside family to support them, I think kids in general would be more successful.
I have a quick question and then I have a comment. I was under the impression that reading recovery was back up and running this year. Am I wrong about that, or it is?
No, it's back up and running.
Okay.
But it is, you know, it's been hard. It's been difficult because it's one-on-one in, you know, close quarters. The protocol depends on that.
I mean, I'm glad to hear it's up and running because I share your belief that for the kids who need it, it's life-changing.
Yeah, it's. I just want to address Mr. Smith's question too, and I hesitate about it, but I'm going to do it because I have the data right in front of me. I'm just going to share the screen again. Can you all see that? Yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So this is, you know, this is third grade, starting in 2016-17. But one of the reasons why I like the NWEA is it really gives us good data. This is, again, an international test with many students. And by third grade, you know, we're in the high 70s as compared to, every other student taking the test. So again, there is a room for improvement. Of course there is, but there is no crisis. This is math. I'm sorry. Yeah, we did even better. I thought so. We're in the mid 80s in reading. And again, I don't mean this to be defensive at all. I just want to kind of set the table for this discussion. And then let's see if I can find the Common Core. Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Director, Dr. Pernick, but I think just about every student takes the ELA, the Common Core ELA.
Correct.
Yes.
And so again, you have, 94% of the students, reaching a proficiency level, at the high school level. So, since the data is right here in front of us, I just want to set the table with that. Room for improvement, yes, but sometimes when I hear us talking about literacy, it sounds like people think there's a crisis, and there isn't.
Well, Dr. Miller, I don't want to suggest that the district has a crisis, but I do think that for a child who is illiterate or not at the correct level, it's potentially a crisis for them. So, and the longer it goes, the more of a crisis it becomes. So, I'm just want to make sure that we're really focusing. And, if we have 5% or 6% or 6% or 7% of kids, and we should only have 3%, it could be really a crisis, really that stays with those children for their entire life and impacts their income earning ability and everything.
100%.
So, yeah.
And again, just to put it back in perspective from earlier days, from earlier board presentations, we're talking about assessment, and in some ways assessment drives certainly instruction and sometimes curriculum. And I think one of the things that we're doing right here is, going positively, but going backwards. Where do we want to be, and how are we going to get there in terms of all three of those pieces?
I have a question since nobody else has their hand up. Dave, Dr. Miola, you asked, is challenging students more important than getting higher results? And then you acknowledge maybe it doesn't have to be either or. That this is one of the places where personally, I think challenging students is really important. And I think sometimes it's easy to think that it's a choice between challenging students and caring about their mental health. And I think for many students, challenging them is taking care of their mental health, and pushing them forward is a great thing. But we have to be ready, if we're pushing them forward, to have a different approach to failure and a different approach to it being okay to try something and then decide maybe that's not right for you. Personally, this is me speaking for myself. I think that would be great training for students in life, because even as people age into the workforce, you have people not knowing when to say, no, this isn't appropriate for me. I need to step off this hamster wheel, or these are where my boundaries are. And so I don't think it's a bad thing to challenge students and let them to decide where their boundaries are. With that in mind, I'm looking at these the low numbers of Hispanic students and students with disabilities in the accelerated math and science program, and thinking about that. And I actually see those students as a placeholder, because I think probably there are other students that don't fall into those buckets that maybe could be in there as well. So my question is this isn't in your data here, but earth science, I am aware that the criteria for getting into earth science is a qualifying test that has to do not with mathematical knowledge or scientific knowledge, but with reading data, reading charts, the kind of things that they should have learned in science. It's not memorization. It's not rote, a certain level of scientific knowledge that they're supposed to have. But we also look at their first and second quarter of 7th grade science, English, social studies, and world language grades. Not to put anybody on the spot, but I am putting you on the spot. Is that a door that allows kids who should be accelerated in science to easily walk through that door? Because I'm thinking that and again, I'm generalizing here, but students with disabilities, one of the things that we sometimes see is asynchronous development and asynchronous performance in different subjects. And if you have an native Spanish speaking student, you may have different performance in different classes. And also, we all know that there are some students who foreign language simply isn't their bailiwick, and they can't perform the same way. And separate from those categories, you may just have students who are fabulous at science, and that's where their passion lies, and they would meet the challenge there, but aren't necessarily performing the same way in other classes. So can you comment a little bit on, are we missing students with that kind of gate up?
Rachel, can I just actually ask my question before they comment? Because it's in line with a little bit with yours. So actually, my question is, you are the professionals, and we're lucky to have all of you actually on at the same times at different levels. So my question for you is, what do you believe on a professional basis? Should we have no gates? Should we be allowing students who want to take accelerated math in 7th grade, or earth science in 8th grade, or even any of the AP courses or any of the accelerated courses, should we be allowing the participation, as Dr. Pernig talked about the differences between participation and quality? Again, I recognize that doing so has a lot of other consequences, class size, staffing, management. So I understand all of that, but I'm asking you on a conceptual basis, do you believe that we should have some sort of control, or should we allow for opportunity? I know Dr. Hines, and I know how we feel overall, but I'm just curious before we start talking about specific students that have the entrance, can we open it up to all?
Thank you, Emily, for making my question look less out there.
That's how we do it, Rachel. That's how we do it.
So let me take sorry, Dave. Yeah, you want to go first, or?
Yeah, well, I can't get in too much trouble anymore, so I'll start it, and then you guys can whittle it down. I mean, honestly, I think that the question is it's kind of a choice, just like we said before about quantity or quality. It's a choice that we really don't have to make. I think the question is, it's not like whether we do one or the other. I mean, most of you on the screen know that I'm a proponent of opening up opportunities for all kids, and making sure that students have the opportunity to fail, because I think we learn from failure. And I think, but when those failure numbers turn into participation rates in your Newsday reports, that's the part that we have to grapple with as a district. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to put the NWEA data in here, because the state data is not very valid and reliable anymore. It's because of the participation rates and because of the way that they norm the criterion tests. And you can see it. The NWEA results are much more consistent and much better. So to get back to your question, I feel strongly, and always have, and it may be because of my arts background. I always talk about arts and sports when we talk about instruction, curriculum instruction, and assessment, because I think the arts and sports have it right in a lot more ways than we do in academics. Are there kids who would learn better in homogeneous groups, like-minded, very high achieving in certain subjects? Absolutely, there's no question about it. There's data all over the place about it. But are we going to run our public school on that, and or to what extent? So, for me, it's not a choice of either or. It's a question of finding the balance.
So I'm
So,
going to take sorry. Rachel,
no, go ahead, Dr. Hines. That's great.
Yeah, as always, I appreciate Dr. Mioli's perspective. I have a little different perspective. Not to say one's right or one's wrong. It's just different. I love the fact if a student wants to attempt to take a course or something, and they feel they're ready, they should have the opportunity to do so. Now, part of our responsibility is making sure we put enough tools in their toolbox to be successful or as successful as possible. So let's say, they're in high school and they want to take an AP course. They've never taken an AP course, but they love this content area, but there are certain criteria that they just can't hop over. I'm in favor of that. I think that's incredibly important to do so. But if we move in this direction, we have to do some soul searching as far as making sure students, as many as possible, are set up for success and how we define what that success looks like. Because this is a systemic conversation. This is something that starts, again, at the base of this whole pyramid, which is at the primary level. So they have those tools. But I am really in favor of taking as much as possible as the gates down. And I think Dr. Mioli brings up a really good point, though, with sports and with music. I think it's something we have to look at and learn from. But I'm all in favor of taking as many barriers down as possible, because sometimes a student doesn't know what they're capable of until they try something that they never thought they can succeed at. And that's part of why we're here. So I'm glad those questions, plural, were asked.
I think, Dr. Hines, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I'm hearing you saying is we take down what we can take down, but we make sure it's logical. And I think that's the same as what Dr. Mioli is saying, is that there has to be balance, right? Like you can't have a student who's never taken Spanish take AP Spanish. They're not ready for that class. It's appropriate and right for the school to say, this is not where you are yet. There's a pathway to get here. But there are other gates that are maybe appropriate for thinking about.
Yeah, I think I think it's a good point. So Ari and I have spoken about this too, as far as some of the ideas that he has. When we move in this direction, and I think we will, it should be with some of the logical courses first, and really targeting what that looks like, and then having conversations with Beth to make sure that we have those appropriate systems in place at the middle school so they'll be successful. But if we're looking to increase certain subgroups of our student population to take courses they never maybe would have dreamed of taking before, that's a philosophical shift that I know we can do successfully if we do it the right way.
So I'm going to call on the people with their hands up, but trying to move us back towards the topic that's in front of us today, which is these standard assessments, and I think what we can learn from them. I'm wondering, we do have this standardized assessment data, and if we have concerns about whether kids are in the right place in terms of placement in classes, do we do any comparisons between the standardized test data and class grade or performance data from students, or any comparison between the standardized test data and accelerated placement for students? Do we use this data as a check to see if we are challenging students appropriately or treating them appropriately?
I mean, the short, simple answer is yes. And again, I don't mean to hog, but I just want to kind of lead the way in terms of where we go. Frankly, the state data, especially in the last 2 years, has been useless. Last 2 years, and before that, I think you've seen very clearly that it is suspect. And so there are at least two people on the screen who have talked about opt-outs. And so I think there is a discussion to be had about whether that percentage where we have 60-ish, 67, 68% of our students getting a proficiency rate in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, whether that's going to bother us or not. Or whether we want to, look at the NWEA results. We look at both, but the NWEA, number one, it's given 3 times a year, so it really shows growth or lack thereof. And it's tied in to the whole response to intervention system. So there are other engines that go from that in terms of supporting students.
I see Nan has her hand up, and I know we're getting towards 10:30. I do want to open it up to community comments as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of the points in terms of the validity and reliability of the New York State exams, and that the NWEA is a lot more consistent and has been shown to just be more representative in a more accurate way of measuring our students. And the other, it's a question that doesn't have to get answered necessarily, but it goes back to the Gates conversation. As far as I understand it, there are some courses in the district that have no gates, and then there are other courses that have many gates. Is that accurate, or is that not?
I'm happy to start if you want, Dr. Mioli.
You're on.
I think, and when we look at the AP program, there are some courses that have what I would consider to be natural gates, right? We call them prerequisites. So you look at a course like AP Calculus. There are prerequisites that are going to always exist for students, which goes back to Rachel, your initial point, right? We're not just going to allow a 10th grader to take BC Calc. We're going to need to see that they've met some of the other prerequisites first. But a course like AP US History, there isn't a gate there at all. Students need to take US History in order to graduate. And that's why we see a participation rate that is enormous and is often the first or second AP course that students will attempt because there's virtually no gate. You need to have passed Global 1 and 2, which, is everybody. So, so gates, yes, do exist in some areas, but most of them in our AP program where we really favor open enrollment, if they're not natural gates, then there are no gates at all.
But there are gates to get into the honors programs, right, Dr. Pernick?
So we've eased some of those gates up too. Yes, there are students who qualify, but we host parents who want to waive their children in, and we've actually moved that, like those meetings. I think when we talk about removing the gates, we also have to talk about our willingness to be honest with each other. And I think that's critical and sometimes is met with frustration from parents or from students. So we want parents and students to have as much information as possible about the commitment that they're about to make before they make it. And I think that goes hand in hand with removing or lowering the gates.
Ms. Melkonian, did you have more that you were to your comment after that question or no?
Nope, I'm good. I'd like to let the community speak if we're ready to do that.
I know we're at 10:30. Administrators, do you mind staying for a few more minutes and we'll see if the community has comments?
I can certainly stay for a few more minutes.
And I see Dr. Pernick has to leave. Thank you. We'll miss you, but thank you for all of this.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too. I don't see any community comments right now. If anybody has any questions or comments, go ahead and raise your hand. There we go.
Okay.
Sorry. Dr.
No,
Muley,
I was going to fill in the blank, but go ahead.
Okay.
I'll hold it.
I see that Ms. Brassel has a question or comment. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. And thank you for pronouncing my last name correctly.
Oh, I was paying attention when you said it. The board meeting.
I'm just curious if you've ever gotten feedback from teachers regarding children and the NWEA that have attention issues or tend to be impulsive. Are the results of the tests with those children still valid, or do they get thrown out?
I'll start. They don't get thrown out usually. First of all, the NWEAs are given with most accommodations for students who get them. Not all, but
like what? But most accommodations, does that include having the test read to you?
well, not on the reading test. No.
Okay. Okay, so a child who has the accommodation of tests will be read should have the math NWEA read to them.
I'm gonna have to plead ignorance on that precise thing. It's been a while since I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up for that exact one. But I know that most of the accommodations are given, and I know some are not, because I don't know if anybody else knows the answer to that specific question. But I don't.
Math is read to them.
Math is read to them. Thank you.
Yes, you're
And
welcome.
also, Dr. Muley, there is a rapid guessing percentage on the exam. So if we do see that, we give the exam again.
Thank you very much. That is very useful information. I did not know that.
I'm glad you asked.
Yes, because I've been told that. Oh, one more question. I know that we use the NWEA as, I think if somebody falls below the 25th percentile, they're considered a candidate for RTI.
For academic intervention services, yes.
Yes. Is there ever an exception to that? Or do all children who fall below the 25th percentile get RTI if they're in general education?
So, and there are always exceptions to everything. We just redid that whole that whole report on RTI and our protocol for it.
I was reading through it yesterday.
I'm sorry?
I said, yes, I was reading through it yesterday. I know it was updated in January of 21.
So, it's meant to be a guideline so that, everybody knows what to expect. Again, I can only speak for the years that I was at the elementary level. The simple answer is that we all try to do the best we can for our students. So if we have a teacher who can take a student, who's on the 24th percentile or whatever it is, they do, or we find some other way of giving them some other kind of help. But what the protocol is meant to do is to just have expectations so that, we all know kind of where we're going with the broad brushstrokes of all the students. And it's also a federal and state law that we identify these students early. And then, as Dr. Hines said earlier, alluded to earlier, and I know Adam Smith is underneath or on the top of what he is talking about in terms of literacy, to get students as early as we can and as quickly as we can. That's what response to intervention is all about: identifying the students, giving them the help they need, and getting them back up to as close to grade level as we can before it becomes a bigger problem.
Dr. Muley, but we do use multiple measures. So we do not take just one test into account on whether they get building level service or not. So I think that's important to just point out that, a one-day test is not reflective always on how a student performs.
Thank you. I should bring all you guys with me all the time.
Same thing at the elementary level. Not only do the reading staff, but the classroom teachers use multiple measures.
Thank you. I see we have a hand up from Mr. Borda. Mr. Borda, I'm going to allow you to talk. Oh, hold on a second. Oh, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Am I unmuted?
You are. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm glad that the MAPS exams are given such a look at. We have been arguing for many years since our son was in elementary school about the use of the mapping exams as a way of identifying and looking at academic progress. I remember very clearly years back how people were saying, no, we can't use that. And there were groups, self-interest groups that totally fought against that, not only in New York State, but across the nation, particularly in Washington State. But trying to lower barriers that are artificially created is great. And I salute the words of Dr. Hines for saying that, and I know that he actually has acted on that. The question remains as to who is making the decisions for the students to even have access to these exams. Are these decisions capricious, arbitrary, irrational? Is someone supervising this, the people that are making these decisions? If you don't look at that, you can have the best of intentions. Nothing is going to happen because certain people will continue making certain decisions that are arbitrary and capricious. And finally, you do need to look at the curriculum and how the curriculum is being taught. And I will end up by saying this, as I have expressed to some of you and to the Board of Education. If elementary math education in elementary school is not fixed, you are condemning students never to achieve their highest level. And this echoes Mr. Smith's words in reading. The same thing goes with math. So if you want to be honest and you want to be transparent, you need to look at this. And I know this is a political thing, and many of you don't want to go there because you don't want any more hassles. You have enough as it is. But I just wanted to say those words. Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and assume, I think, when Mr. Borda says arbitrary and capricious, I don't think he means in a way that there's wrongdoing, but I think we're learning as we go through this NYU Metro process, especially that there is bias and assumptions in every process. And I appreciate that you just raised that point, Mr. Borda, because, it may be that allowing more access to things like math also means laying the foundation in elementary school, the way we are saying we're laying the foundation for reading success with all of these programs. Maybe we need to look at challenging students in math up to their level at the elementary school. Mr. Borda, I see your hand back up. I think that you should be allowed to speak. Go ahead.
Okay, if you hear me,
we hear you.
When I use the word capricious, arbitrary, and without any rational educational purpose, I'm using the words of the state. I'm using the words of the Department of Education and the commissioner, as well as the thousands of findings in the courts. As you know from my writings to the board, boards of education are given a lot of power, ample power to run efficient educational systems. But whomever is in the trenches making decisions, and the only arm or the only weapon that a parent has is to be able to protest decisions that are made arbitrarily, capriciously, and without any rational educational purpose. It's the only thing that the courts will entertain. So that's what I mean. I'm not accusing anyone in particular. I think it's systemic. systemically, people do fall into their little comfortable zone in judging, stereotyping, making decisions. I think that we, myself and our group, Concerned Parents, proved that the group of students that we advocated for are or became some of the top math students at the middle school level and will be at the high school level. Many of those students, 6 of them to speak of, would have been denied and were actually tried to be prevented from entering those courses because someone at some point, at some level, wanted to say, no, we know better. Well, as you know, and I will end with this, I am an educator. I have over 33 years of experience with my wife, and we have in Concerned Parents a lot of very smart people that know exactly what we're talking about. That's what I'm referring to. This is not a personal accusation of anyone, but it is like everything else, right? Systemic, the higher ups. And I just want to say something that, please, just one more sentence. I know I have heard in past presentations that you guys talk about having the 30,000 view over the district, the Board of Education. You know, when you have a 30,000 feet view, you don't see anything, right? You are on a plane 30,000 feet, you don't know what is going on in the ground. And sometimes the clouds get in the way and you don't even see anything now. No, you need to be there on the ground. That does not mean, and I repeat again, that does not mean that the Board of Education is going to be sitting in the back of the teacher's room or the principal's room and dictating things. We don't want to happen here what is happening in Tennessee, right? So that's not what I'm advocating. But being a Board of Education member means that I want to know what is going on in my district and then speak to the CEO, which is Dr. Hines. How can we fix this? That's normal. I am not saying anything that is abnormal. You talk to your fellow board members. There are very active board members who want to know the details, not to micromanage, but to know and be able to make policy decisions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borda. I knew when you said arbitrary and capricious that you were using legal language and talking about an institutional problem, but I think sometimes, first of all, sometimes legal language can feel very insensitive and people can take it personally. I think Dr. Pernick's comment earlier about how we need to be honest with each other when we're having these conversations is well placed here, not just for placement at the high school, but I personally am very heartened to be serving on a board and with an administration that has been very vocal about wanting to really speak honestly and look at these things and make changes where we can to make the experience better for students. I see 2 more community comment hands, which I'm going to go ahead and comment on. I'm sorry if you will all indulge us for 5 more minutes. And
I think if you don't mind, I'm going to let the other administrators go, and I'll have to brave it along.
I don't mind at all.
Thank you.
Whatever you think is appropriate.
I know some of them have to go. If you want to stay, you're welcome to stay, but I know some of you have.
Thank you all for all of your time on this.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see Ms. Saad has her hand up and you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi.
I just wanted to comment on our reading numbers and make a suggestion going forward when looking at the trends. 95% of all kids, regardless of disability, even kids with the worst debilitating disabilities, over 95% of them are capable of reading when given proper instruction. So I was hoping going forward on your graphs, instead of comparing to other neighboring districts, which are pretty much doing the same thing as us and also not failing too many kids, maybe you could even just put a bar on your graphs at 95% and make a comment. This is our goal, teaching all kids to read and write. Because right now, just comparing to the other districts, it doesn't show that our goal should be greater than 95% or should be 95%, you know? It shouldn't be just looking at neighboring districts that do the same as us. I also have a comment on what's work on reading and recovery. You guys could hear me, right?
Loud and clear.
Yes, we can hear you. Keep going.
Reading recovery. My son has dyslexia and he was put in reading recovery in first grade. And even What's Works Clearinghouse says that reading recovery is horrible is not appropriate for kids with learning disabilities. I'm wondering how many kids by first grade, all the dyslexic kids, how many of them are actually identified by first grade and put in reading recovery? I'm sure that reading recovery classes are filled with kids with dyslexia, most of which will never even be diagnosed. But the fact is we have tons of dyslexic kids in our reading recovery class. And even What's Works Clearinghouse says it's not appropriate for dyslexic kids. I know for a fact it's still hurting my son. So how is going forward, we're going to make sure that we're not putting dyslexic kids in reading recovery?
Dr. Rioli, it's just you.
You should have let Dr. Barcella stay on.
I know you love it, and maybe it was good for your kid, but it's not good for dyslexic kids.
So let's just draw a distinction between not being good for and not being, the most effective tool for. I think I'm not an expert on dyslexia or reading recovery, but I think what I can agree with you on is that as you also said, if we have a diagnosis or if we know that a student is dyslexic, there are other things that we can do with them. I think that part of your comment we can agree on. I think it is very hard. The whole purpose of reading recovery, again, to go back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of catching students early and giving them intensive care and appropriate instruction is to try to get them back on track as quickly as possible, because we know that that's the best way to have students meet with success. The later in their careers they get, with issues, the harder they are to remediate. And there's all, I want to keep going off on the words I'm using, but there's no time. But anyway, I think I've addressed what you said.
And I think that you've heard the point. Mrs. Saad, I'm assuming that you have a follow-up, but I'm just going to ask that you be brief because we're way over, but you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that What Works Clearinghouse is the site that the state refers to when selecting appropriate instruction. And it says that reading recovery is not appropriate for students with disabilities. So students with disabilities should not be put into reading recovery going forward.
I think Dr. Rioli is hearing your comments, but if I'm reading the implications, he's saying his between the lines. I mean, he's saying if they have a diagnosis, they do something else. But I think your point that maybe we need to identify those students is out there. And Dr. Rioli, maybe at a future date, I think there's some follow-up data that would be interesting and useful for the board to have. And I would put on that list like success percentages on reading recovery. And also all of the data that is Hispanic students, I'd love to see broken out to ELS as well, because I don't know if that is ELS or if it is Hispanic students inclusive of ELS.
That I can answer.
Okay, go ahead. And also ELS would include other languages. Exactly.
Both. Yeah. It is not exclusive, not mutually exclusive. The Hispanic population, in fact, I let Christine go as well. But the L percentage of our Hispanic population is less than you would think. It's, depending on the grade level and the situation, it's between like 30 and 50 or 55%. So they're not the same data.
Okay.
Rachel, I actually think the big takeaway from the comment we just heard, and I know we're short on time, is setting a goal as it relates to the reading performance. Emily, it's something we should be thinking about for the next time we hear about this in assessment. Guys, sorry, I'm stuck in the COVID ward with some kids, but I basically, I think that kind of a way to wrap up the presentation we saw today is, if we do want to think about how to, how are we going to act on what we saw, is what is our goal? What do we want to change from this? And I don't know if 95% is the number, but it's certainly, I don't think the number should be parity with our neighbors necessarily.
I think also, Adam, we've discussed as a committee wanting to tackle literacy in a much more detailed way this year. And so maybe as a board, this gives us a start on the kind of questions we would have, and maybe we can assemble those questions to give the administration a little bit more guidance on what we're going to want to see in a more full-blown literacy presentation, because I think this is the tip of the iceberg on the literacy, because it's just as presented as part of the assessments. Does that make sense to you?
Perfectly. So we should definitely add a tickler to that meeting that we should think about what is our target.
That's great. And maybe the committee will make sure that we are all on the same page about what those targets are and what the information is, so we can communicate it. And I think, thank you for that information about the L's, Dr. Mioli, because I think then, we would like to know what the L data looks like as well. And that could be part of a future literacy conversation. I see one more hand, Nicoletta. I'm assuming Nicoletta Gargas, but correct me if you're a different Nicoletta, and you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Good morning. Yes, it's Nicoletta Gargas. Maybe this is a question for next time, since we are past the time. I just wanted to know, if a child is in AIS multiple years, is there an exit strategy that is reviewed with the parent?
So it's hard for me to give like a general answer to that, but generally, yes. I think the practical answer is that I think, there's two sides to AIS. When we have kids who are struggling, we want to give them everything that that they can get. And on the other hand, we want to get them out of the program, so that they can be back in the mainstream. And depending on the program, not having to take instructional time to be in other places than the classroom. Every year, as a parent, you should be you should be being informed, that your child is getting AIS in either math or reading, and so you have that opportunity to do so. You have to give permission for the actual program itself or the services, and I think depending on the level, that it's something that I would think the teacher would bring up most of the time, and certainly the parent would, in terms of, where are we, and what are we thinking in terms of how long this is going to go on. I'm hesitating only because, there are so many examples, and I hate to generalize among either parents or teachers or students, but the whole RTI process is set up for that purpose. I think that's maybe a clearer answer. The whole concept of universal screening, and that means that every student, at least K-8, gets that NWEA, the MAP screener, 3 times at the elementary level 3 times, at the middle school level twice a year, gives us lots of good data. But those kids who fall below a certain mark are getting progress monitoring. So even in between those 3 tests, there are students who are getting, targeted assistance, and then they're supposed to be getting targeted assistance and then progress and monitoring the progress. And that should be being shared with the parent.
Now, when it is being shared with the parent, though, if the parent feels, say, that the child has progressed, and what are the steps, I guess, what I'm asking is, what steps should a parent take if they feel that their child should be moved from AIS? Are they supposed to be getting a progress report? Like say at home, things may be different than they are at school. So is there a progress report? Is there someone that they should be reaching out to if the teacher isn't, if there's no response or no communication?
Do you have a particular level in mind? It'll help me to make, because there's slightly different answers. Are you talking about elementary or? Elementary,
yes.
Yeah. So there's no separate progress report. The AIS teacher or teachers, would be coordinating with the classroom teacher, and the classroom teacher would be reflecting information on their, report card data. Again, when I had 19 years at the elementary level, AIS teachers would very often join classroom teachers in conversations during parent-teacher conferences, or sometimes they'd have 2 separate ones. But I think what I hear you saying in between the lines is, if a parent doesn't want their student in AIS anymore, or they feel like they don't need those services anymore, is there anything they can do? And the answer is very simple, that, yeah, again, you have to give your permission for a student, for your child to be in a bona fide AIS program, if it's, so you can do that anytime. If for whatever reason you feel like your child, and I'm saying that universally, doesn't need those services, I'd be careful about making that decision if it's counter to what the professionals are telling you, but you do have that right.
I think with that, we should really call it, because we are way over. But thank you so much, Dr. Mioli, and please pass our thanks along to all of the administrators that played a role in this very data-intensive presentation. I think the board will pass along some additional points that we'd like to hear in future presentations about literacy, and maybe discuss if there are any action items that come out of this at the larger board meeting.
Okay.
But thank you again for your time, and thank you everybody for attending. And
thank you.
We will see you all soon. Have a good day,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you very much.